A poor stray cat joined its paws and bowed, begging pedestrians for help, leaving everyone in shock. The bitter wind whipped through Chicago's Millennium Park, carrying snowflakes that danced and swirled before settling on the already white-blanketed ground. Sarah pulled her wool scarf tighter around her neck, grateful for Ethan's warm hand intertwined with hers as they navigated through the winter wonderland. The city's famous bean sculpture loomed behind them, its metallic surface reflecting the gray January sky. Their weekend getaway to Chicago hadn't been planned, more of a spontaneous decision to escape their daily routine and the weight of recent challenges. The past few months had tested their relationship in ways they never expected, but somehow, being in this unfamiliar city made everything feel lighter, more manageable. "Look at that," Ethan suddenly whispered, gently tugging Sarah's hand. His eyes were fixed on something near a newspaper stand, where a small crowd had gathered. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from. Stay tuned. Through the gaps between hurried pedestrians, they caught glimpses of what had captured everyone's attention: a scraggly cat with matted fur, performing what could only be described as a prayer. The feline sat perfectly still, its front paws pressed together against its chest, head slightly bowed. The gesture was so deliberate, so human-like, that it stopped people in their tracks. "I've never seen anything like it," Sarah breathed, her artist's eye immediately drawn to the peculiar scene. The cat's fur, though dirty and tangled, had a unique pattern of grey and white patches that reminded her of clouds before a storm. As they watched, the cat repeated its curious gesture every time someone passed by, as if pleading for something beyond mere food or shelter. Unlike other strays, it didn't chase after people or meow for attention. Instead, it remained in its spot, performing its solemn ritual with an almost religious dedication. "We can't just leave it here," Ethan said, already reaching into his coat pocket where he'd stored a bagel from their breakfast run. Sarah nodded, knowing exactly what he was thinking. Throughout their 5 years together, they'd often joked about how in sync their thoughts could be, especially when it came to helping others. They approached slowly, careful not to startle the unusual creature. The cat turned its head toward them, revealing striking amber eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom. When Ethan crouched down and offered a piece of the bagel, the cat's demeanor shifted subtly. It maintained its dignified composure, but gracefully moved forward, accepting the offering with gentle appreciation. "Hey there, little one," Sarah cooed, kneeling beside Ethan. The cat's response surprised them both. Instead of devouring the food immediately, it first performed its prayer-like gesture, then delicately accepted the morsel. As it ate, it kept glancing up at them, as if ensuring they wouldn't disappear. The tenderness of the moment stirred something in Sarah's chest. She exchanged a look with Ethan, recognizing the same emotion in his eyes that she felt in her heart. They had come to Chicago seeking a brief escape from their troubles, but perhaps they had found something more meaningful instead. "We should take it to a shelter," Ethan suggested, his voice soft but determined. "It's too cold out here, and clearly, this little guy is special." Sarah agreed, though something about the cat's behavior made her wonder if there was more to its story than simple abandonment. As Ethan gently scooped up their new friend, the cat didn't resist. Instead, it pressed its paws together one more time, this final prayer-like gesture seemingly directed at them. The crowd around them had thinned, but those who remained watched with warm smiles as the couple carefully wrapped the cat in Sarah's scarf. A young girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing and whispering, "Look, Mommy, the praying kitty found its angels." As they carried their precious cargo toward their rental car, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was more than mere chance. The cat's unusual behavior, its dignified demeanor despite its apparent hardships, and the timing of their meeting, it all felt somehow significant, as if the universe had orchestrated this moment specifically for them. Little did they know that their impromptu rescue would set in motion a chain of events that would not only unravel the mystery behind the praying cat, but also help heal wounds they didn't even know they carried. Their weekend getaway had suddenly transformed into something far more meaningful, the beginning of an extraordinary journey that would change multiple lives, human and feline alike. The snowfall intensified as they reached their car, creating a curtain of white that seemed to separate them from the rest of the world. In that moment, with the strange cat nestled safely between them, both Sarah and Ethan felt a spark of hope they hadn't experienced in months. Sometimes, they would later reflect, the most profound changes in life begin with the smallest, most unexpected encounters. The drive to Hope Shelter should have been straightforward, but their new companion had other ideas. As soon as they turned onto Michigan Avenue, the cat's demeanor changed dramatically. Gone was the serene creature from the park, replaced by an animal clearly in distress. Every time they approached a red light, the cat would press itself against the back seat, trembling violently. "Something's wrong," Sarah said, reaching back to comfort their furry passenger. The cat allowed her touch but kept its eyes fixed on the passing buildings, its body tense as a bowstring. "Jess, it's almost like he knows where we're going." Ethan adjusted the rear-view mirror to better observe their nervous passenger. "Maybe we should try the carrier the shelter recommended we bring." They had stopped at a pet store on their way, purchasing basic supplies including a standard cat carrier. But when Sarah attempted to coax the cat into the carrier, it backed away, pressing its paws together in that peculiar prayer-like gesture they'd witnessed earlier. This time, however, the movement seemed more desperate, almost pleading. "It's okay, we won't force you," Sarah soothed, moving the carrier to the trunk. She remained in the back seat with their nervous friend, gently stroking its matted fur. Under her careful touch, she felt countless small bumps and irregularities, signs of a difficult past hidden beneath the tangled coat. The Hope Shelter appeared ahead, a modern two-story building with warm yellow walls and large windows. Pictures of happy animals with their new families decorated the entrance, offering hope to those still waiting for their forever homes. As they pulled into the parking lot, their feline companion surprised them again by walking calmly to Sarah's lap and performing its signature prayer gesture. "It's like he's thanking us," Ethan observed, reaching over to scratch behind the cat's ears. "Or maybe asking for protection." Inside the shelter, they were greeted by Dr. Rachel Chen, the lead veterinarian, whose kind eyes crinkled with curiosity as she observed their unusual rescue. "I've been working with cats for 15 years, she said, watching the cat perform its prayer-like movement. "But I've never seen anything quite like this." The examination revealed more than they expected. Beneath the matted fur, Dr. Chen discovered a pattern of small, healed scratches and marks that told a story of survival. "These aren't from fights with other animals," she explained, pointing to particularly uniform marks along the cat's side. "These look more like—" She paused, frowning slightly as she continued her examination. "It's strange. Some of these marks suggest this cat might have lived in an enclosed space for a while, but others indicate outdoor living. It's as if he's lived two completely different lives." While they processed this information, a young volunteer named Maya entered the examination room with some cleaning supplies. The moment she saw their rescue, she gasped, "Oh my goodness, is this the praying cat from Millennium Park? Someone posted about him on our community board last week." Sarah and Ethan exchanged surprised looks. "He's been seen before?" Sarah asked, leaning forward with interest. Maya nodded enthusiastically, pulling out her phone. Several people reported seeing him in different parts of downtown, always doing that prayer gesture. Some even tried to approach him, but he would disappear before anyone could get close. Everyone's been wondering about his story. As if aware he was the topic of conversation, the cat performed his signature move once again, drawing amazed looks from the shelter staff. Dr. Chen made some notes in her tablet, then looked up with a warm smile. "Well, he seems healthy overall, despite some signs of malnourishment. We'll need to keep him for observation and necessary treatments, but—" She paused as the cat moved deliberately to sit between Sarah and Ethan, pressing against their legs. "I have a feeling you two might be interested in providing him a forever home once he's cleared." The couple shared a meaningful look. They hadn't discussed adoption. Their weekend getaway wasn't supposed to include such a life-changing decision. Yet something about this mysterious cat felt right, as if their meeting in the park had been orchestrated by fate itself. "We'll need to think about it," Ethan said carefully, though his hand had already found its way back to the cat's head, scratching gently behind the ears. "We live in an apartment in Milwaukee, and we'd need to make some arrangements." "Of course," Dr. Chen nodded understandingly. "Take your time. Meanwhile, he'll need a name for our records." Sarah watched as the cat pressed its paws together one more time. This gesture somehow feeling different from the others, more peaceful, more trusting. "Max," she said suddenly, surprising herself. "I think we should call him Max." The name felt right the moment she said it, and even the cat seemed to approve, releasing a soft purr for the first time since they'd found him. However, none of them could have predicted how this simple act of naming would set in motion a series of events that would unravel the mystery behind the praying cat of Millennium Park. As they prepared to leave Max in the capable hands of the shelter staff, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were now part of something much bigger than a simple rescue. The marks on Max's body, his strange behavior in the car-y, and his already existing reputation in the area, all pieces of a puzzle they had yet to understand. Looking back at Max one last time before leaving, they saw him sitting regally in his new temporary home, paws pressed together in what they now recognized as both a goodbye and a promise. This wasn't the end of their story, it was just the beginning. The video of Max's peculiar prayer gesture spread across social media like wildfire. What started as a simple post on the Hope Shelter's community page quickly transformed into a viral sensation, capturing hearts worldwide. People were fascinated not only by his unique behavior, but also by the gentle dignity he maintained despite his obvious hardships. Sarah found herself spending hours reading through the comments on the shelter's social media posts about Max. Something about his story had touched a collective nerve, inspiring people to share their own tales of animal rescue and transformation. The shelter had even started a dedicated hashtag, the Praying Cat of Chicago. "Look at this," Sarah called to Ethan, who was preparing coffee in their hotel room. They had extended their stay in Chicago, unable to leave while Max's story was still unfolding. Someone claims they saw Max near Navy Pier 3 months ago, doing the same prayer gesture near a fish restaurant. Ethan leaned over her shoulder, scanning the comment. "There's more," he noted, pointing to another response. "A street musician says Max would sit near his guitar case every Wednesday evening last summer, attracting crowds with his unusual behavior." These glimpses into Max's past only deepened the mystery surrounding him. How long had he been wandering Chicago's streets? And more importantly, what had shaped his distinctive behavior? Their pondering was interrupted by a call from Dr. Chen. "You might want to come to the shelter," she said, her voice carrying a note of intrigue. "Someone here says she knows Max." They arrived at Hope Shelter 30 minutes later to find an elderly woman wrapped in multiple layers of worn clothing, her weather-beaten face bearing the marks of someone who had spent considerable time on the streets. Despite her challenging circumstances, her eyes sparkled with intelligence and warmth. "I'm Helen," she introduced herself, her voice surprisingly melodious. "And that little prayer warrior over there," she gestured toward Max's enclosure. "He used to be part of our family." Max, who had been dozing in his bed, immediately perked up at the sound of Helen's voice. He approached the glass partition, performing his prayer gesture with such enthusiasm that several shelter volunteers stopped to watch. "He remembers me," Helen smiled, pressing her hand against the glass. "We had quite the community, you know. Me, Max, and the others. We looked after each other." As Helen shared her story, Sarah and Ethan learned about a makeshift sanctuary that had existed in an abandoned lot near the city's outskirts. Helen, despite her own limited resources, had created a haven for strays and abandoned animals, sharing whatever food and comfort she could provide. Max was special from the day he arrived, Helen recalled, her eyes distant with memory. He was already doing that prayer thing, but back then, it seemed more like a habit born of fear than the gentle gesture it is now. Something or someone had trained him to do that, but he transformed it into his own way of connecting with others. The revelation that Max's signature movement might have originated from a place of fear sent a chill through Sarah's spine. She thought about the marks Dr. Chen had discovered during his examination, wondering what experiences had left such lasting impressions on this gentle soul. Everything changed after the big storm. Helen continued, her voice growing softer. The wind was terrible that night. Our shelter, well, it couldn't withstand nature's fury. We all scattered. I tried to gather everyone afterward, but Max, he just disappeared. As if responding to the sadness in Helen's voice, Max pressed his paws together, holding them there longer than usual. The gesture seemed different somehow, more like a consolation than a prayer. He's really something special, Helen smiled, wiping away a tear. In all my years on the streets, I've never seen an animal with such humanity in their eyes. He doesn't just survive, he connects, makes people stop and think, makes them see something beyond themselves. Dr. Chen, who had been quietly observing the reunion, stepped forward with a gentle suggestion. Helen, we have a program for people who help street animals. Would you be interested in becoming a shelter volunteer? We could really use your experience and knowledge. The offer brought a fresh sparkle to Helen's eyes, but before she could respond, a commotion at the shelter's entrance drew everyone's attention. A well-dressed man had entered, his expensive coat dusted with snow, his face bearing an expression of urgent determination. I'm looking for the praying cat, he announced, his voice carrying across the room. Do I believe he belongs to me? The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Maxon, who had been calmly watching Helen, suddenly retreated to the back of his enclosure. His paws came together in that familiar gesture, but this time it looked less like a prayer and more like a plea. Helen's face had gone pale, her earlier warmth replaced by an unreadable expression. She pulled her layers of clothing tighter around herself, seeming to shrink into the background as the newcomer strode purposefully toward the front desk. Sarah and Ethan exchanged worried glances. Just when they thought they were beginning to understand Max's story, this new development threatened to complicate everything. Who was this man? What claim did he have on Max? And why did his presence cause such a dramatic change in both the cat's and Helen's behavior? The answers to these questions would prove more surprising than any of them could have imagined, leading them down a path that would reveal not only Max's true origins, but also the extraordinary circumstances that had shaped his unique personality. The well-dressed man introduced himself as Tom Whitaker, former owner of Whiskers and Wonders, a once popular pet shop in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood. His expensive wool coat and polished leather shoes created a stark contrast with the shelter's modest surroundings. But there was something unsettled in his demeanor that caught Sarah's attention. That cat, Tom said, pointing toward Max's enclosure. I'd recognize him anywhere. He was one of our star attractions at the shop. We called him Mr. Miyagi because of that bowing thing he does. His laugh sounded forced, almost nervous. Our kids would line up just to see him do his little trick. Dr. Chen maintained her professional composure as she listened to Tom's claim, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Do you have any documentation to support your ownership? Vaccination records, purchase receipts, photos? Tom's confident facade faltered momentarily. The shop's records were lost when I had to close down. Financial troubles. You understand. But I have plenty of witnesses who can verify my story. That cat was special to us, to me. When things got bad, He paused, swallowing hard. I had to make some difficult decisions. From her corner, Helen watched the exchange with growing agitation, her weathered hands clutching her worn jacket. Sarah noticed how the elderly woman seemed to be fighting an internal battle, as if struggling with whether to speak up or remain silent. Max, meanwhile, had pressed himself against the back of his enclosure, his amber eyes fixed on Tom. His paws came together in his characteristic gesture, but there was a tension in his body that hadn't been present before. Even the shelter staff noticed the change in his demeanor. Mr. Whitaker, Dr. Chen spoke carefully. While we appreciate you coming forward, we have certain protocols that must be followed in ownership claims. We'll need to investigate your connection to Max, that's what we've been calling him, and ensure that any decision made is in his best interest. Tom's expression shifted between anxiety and determination. Of course. When I saw the video online, I knew I had to come. I've been trying to make things right, you see, getting back on my feet. I thought maybe this was a sign. Sarah felt Ethan's hand squeeze hers gently. They had been silent observers until now, but something about Tom's story wasn't sitting right with either of them. The timing seemed too convenient, and Max's reaction was telling. Maya, The young volunteer, who had first recognized Max from social media, approached with a tablet. "Sir, would you mind looking at some photos? We've been collecting sightings of Max from around the city. Maybe you could help us establish a timeline." As Tom scrolled through the images, his confidence seemed to waver further. The photos showed Max in various locations across Chicago, each one dated and geotagged. Some were from areas miles away from Lincoln Park, during times when Tom claimed the cat was at his shop. "The timestamps must be wrong," Tom insisted, his voice rising slightly. "He was with us until last spring. These photos, they can't be right." Helen, who had been quiet throughout the exchange, finally stepped forward. Her voice was soft but steady. "I saw him do that prayer thing differently back then. It wasn't gentle like it is now. It was like he was begging, desperate like." Tom's head snapped toward Helen, his eyes widening with recognition. Before he could speak, she continued, "He used to shake something awful whenever delivery trucks would pass by. Took months before he'd stop hiding when he heard engines." The implications of Helen's words hung heavy in the air. "Doctor." Chen exchanged glances with her staff, while Sarah and Ethan moved closer to Max's enclosure protectively. The cat responded by pressing his paws together once more, but this time he turned his back to Tom, facing the couple instead. "I think," Dr. Chen said firmly, "we need to have a more detailed conversation about Max's history, Mr. Whitaker, perhaps in my office." Her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. As Tom followed Dr. Chen down the hallway, his shoulders slumped slightly, the polished veneer cracking further with each step. Maya quickly updated the shelter's security staff, while Helen sank into a nearby chair, looking drained but somehow relieved. Sarah knelt beside Helen's chair. "There's more to this story, isn't there?" she asked gently. Helen nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on Max. "That cat's been through things that would break most spirits, but instead of breaking, he learned to pray. Not for himself, mind you. I watched him do that gesture over sick pigeons, hurt squirrels, even crying children in the park. It's like he took whatever was done to him and turned it into something beautiful." Ethan joined them, his expression thoughtful. "The marks Dr. Chen found on his body." "Tell a story," Helen finished, "but maybe not the one Mr. Fancy Coat in there wants to tell." As if emphasizing Helen's words, Max performed his prayer gesture again, this time with a slow deliberateness that seemed to captivate everyone in the room. In that moment, Sarah realized that uncovering the truth about Max's past wasn't just about resolving an ownership claim, it was about understanding how a creature who had faced adversity could transform fear into grace, trauma into connection. The sound of raised voices from Dr. Chen's office suggested that Tom's story was already beginning to unravel. But as Sarah watched Max calmly grooming himself in his enclosure, she understood that the real mystery wasn't where he had come from, but how he had become the extraordinary being he was now. While Dr. Chen continued her discussion with Tom in her office, Sarah found herself drawn to a collection of donation boxes in the shelter's storage room. She had offered to help Maya organize some newly arrived supplies, but something about these old boxes caught her attention, particularly one that contained various pet accessories from previous residents. "We keep everything that comes in with our rescues," Maya explained, noticing Sarah's interest. "Sometimes families come looking for lost pets and these items help with identification. Other times, they're donated to new adoptions." Sarah's fingers brushed against something leather at the bottom of one box. Pulling it out, she discovered an old collar, its surface worn but still intact. The tag was partially obscured by tarnish, but as she rubbed it clean with her thumb, her heart skipped a beat. "Maya," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Look at this." The collar's tag bore a faded inscription, "Benedict, St. Francis Mission." Below it was a date from 3 years ago and a Chicago address. St. Francis Mission, Maya frowned, pulling up a search on her phone. It was a homeless shelter and soup kitchen in the South Side. They had a small animal therapy program, but they closed down about 2 years ago. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. Benedict? Could that be Max's original name? Where did this collar come from? Maya checked the box's label. This was dropped off last month with a bunch of other donations. No name on the form, just marked as anonymous. The timing seemed too coincidental to ignore. Sarah hurried back to the main area, where Ethan was still talking with Helen. The elderly woman's eyes widened when she saw the collar. "Oh my," Helen whispered, reaching for the weathered leather. "I remember seeing something like this on him, way back when he first started showing up near my spot, but it disappeared long before the storm." The shelter's front door chimed as a new visitor entered, a middle-aged woman in nursing scrubs, her grey hair tied back in a neat bun. She stopped abruptly when she saw the collar in Helen's hands. "Where did you find that?" the woman asked, her voice barely audible. All eyes turned to the newcomer. Even Max, who had been dozing in his enclosure, suddenly sat up at attention, his ears perked forward. "I'm Sister Margaret," she introduced herself, moving closer. "I used to run the animal therapy program at St. Francis Mission, and that collar, it belonged to one of our most special residents." Before she could continue, Tom emerged from Dr. Chen's office, his face flushed and his earlier composure completely gone. He froze when he saw Sister Margaret, the color draining from his face. "Margaret," he stammered. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing, Thomas," she replied coolly. "Especially since you promised to stay away from anything involving the mission's former animals." The tension in the room rose palpably. Max pressed his paws together in his signature gesture, but this time it seemed almost like he was watching, waiting. "I didn't know you were involved," Tom said quickly. "I just saw the video online and thought..." "You thought you could recreate your pet shop success story?" Sister Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "The way you did with the other therapy animals you took from us." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her professional demeanor masking her obvious interest in this unexpected development. "Perhaps we should all sit down. It seems there's more to Max's story than any of us realized." Sarah watched as Sister Margaret approached Max's enclosure. The cat's reaction was immediate and surprising. He moved to the front, pressing his paws together repeatedly, but this time with what appeared to be joy rather than anxiety. "Benedict," Sister Margaret said softly, using his original name, "you always were our best prayer partner." The pieces started falling into place. The prayer gesture wasn't a trick taught for entertainment in a pet shop. It was something far more meaningful, learned in a place dedicated to healing and comfort. Helen spoke up, her voice thick with emotion. "I always wondered why he seemed to know exactly when someone needed comfort. Even in our makeshift camp, he would sit with those who were hurting, doing his little prayer. It brought people hope." Sister Margaret nodded, tears in her eyes. "That was his gift at the mission too. We called him Benedict after St. Benedict Joseph Labre, the patron saint of the homeless. He had a way of connecting with people who had lost everything, showing them they weren't alone." Tom shifted uncomfortably by the office door, his earlier claims about ownership ringing hollow in light of these revelations. But there was something in his expression, a mixture of shame and longing, that suggested his connection to this story wasn't quite finished. As the group gathered in the shelter's meeting room to piece together the full narrative, Max Benedict continued his gentle prayers, each gesture seeming to bridge the past and present, connecting all the people whose lives he had touched along his extraordinary journey. The mystery of his origins was beginning to unravel, but with each new revelation came deeper questions about the transformative power of compassion and the unexpected ways that healing could manifest, even through the simple, repeated gesture of a cat's paws pressed together in prayer. In the shelter's meeting room, surrounded by concerned faces and watchful eyes, Sister Margaret began to unravel the full story of the cat they knew as both Max and Benedict. Her voice carried the weight of memories as she spoke, while the subject of her tale watched intently from his newly opened enclosure, his paws occasionally coming together in his characteristic gesture. "Benedict came to us as a scared young cat," Sister Margaret began, her fingers absently tracing the worn edges of the collar. "A local firefighter found him hiding in a church garden, already doing his prayer gesture, though back then it seemed more like a nervous tick than the purposeful movement it became." Sarah and Ethan exchanged glances, remembering how Max had trembled in their car that first day. Helen leaned forward in her chair, while Tom remained in the corner, his expensive coat now looking somehow out of place in the humble surroundings. "At the mission, we discovered he had an extraordinary ability to sense when people were in distress, He would sit with them, pray with them in his own way. It was remarkable how many of our visitors found comfort in his presence. Some even started calling him the little saint. But then things changed. Tom interjected suddenly, his voice carrying a hint of desperation. The mission was struggling. You needed money for repairs, went for supplies. I thought I could help. Sister Margaret's expression hardened slightly. By turning our therapy animals into attractions, by teaching them tricks for paying customers. I had good intentions, Tom protested, but his voice lacked conviction. My shop was doing well. I thought I could raise funds for the mission and give the animals a better life. Instead, Sister Margaret continued, you took advantage of our financial crisis to acquire our therapy animals, including Benedict. You promised they would still help people, just in a different way. Helen's weathered face showed a flash of recognition. That's why he was so scared of delivery trucks. Your shop was next to a loading dock, wasn't it? Tom nodded miserably. The noise, it frightened all the animals, but Benedict especially. He would hide for hours, doing that prayer gesture over and over. I thought if I could just make it into an attraction, give people something to marvel at. You commercialized his trauma, Dr. Chen said quietly, her professional demeanor tinged with disapproval. Sarah felt a surge of protectiveness as she watched Max Benedict, who had moved to sit between her and Ethan. His presence seemed to calm the rising tensions in the room, even as his story revealed more layers of complexity. When the shop started failing, Tom admitted, I panicked. The animals, I couldn't care for them properly anymore. Some I managed to find homes for, but others... He trailed off, unable to meet anyone's eyes. You abandoned them, Helen finished, her voice carrying years of experience with the consequences of such actions. Left them to fend for themselves. I told myself they would be better off, Tom whispered, that someone would find them, help them. When I saw the video online, I thought maybe I could make things right. Sister Margaret sighed, her expression softening slightly. The road to healing isn't paved with deception, Thomas. Benedict has found his way without you, transforming his experiences into something beautiful. Perhaps it's time you did the same. As if in response to her words, Max Benedict performed his prayer gesture, this time facing Tom. The simple action seemed to break something in the man's carefully constructed facade. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time since arriving at the shelter, his expression showed genuine remorse. I'm sorry, he said, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry. I'll make a donation to the shelter. And I'll tell the truth about where the other animals might have ended up. Maybe some of them can still be found. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly, already reaching for her tablet to take notes. That would be incredibly helpful, Mr. Whitaker. Perhaps something positive can still come from this situation. As Tom began sharing information about the other displaced animals, Sarah noticed something remarkable. Max Benedict moved methodically around the room, performing his prayer gesture for each person present, first Helen, then Sister Margaret, even Tom, as if offering forgiveness and healing to everyone touched by his journey. He's still doing what he was meant to do, Sister Margaret observed with a gentle smile. Still bringing people together, still helping souls find peace, different circumstances, same mission. The revelation of Max Benedict's past hadn't diminished his special nature. If anything, it had deepened the miracle of his resilience. His ability to transform a gesture born of anxiety into one of comfort and connection spoke to something profound about the power of compassion to transcend hardship. As the afternoon light filtered through the shelter windows, casting warm patterns across the floor, Sarah and Ethan realized that their unexpected encounter in Millennium Park had led them into a story far richer and more meaningful than they could have imagined. The mystery of the praying cat was evolving into something else entirely, a testament to the extraordinary ways that healing could manifest, even through the most unexpected channels. The days following the revelations about Max Benedict's past brought unexpected changes to everyone involved. The Hope Shelter had become a hub of activity, with Tom's information leading to the location of several other former therapy animals from the St. Francis mission. Dr. Chen coordinated with rescue groups across Chicago, while Sister Margaret offered her expertise to help rehabilitate the newly found animals. Helen, to everyone's delight, had accepted the shelter's offer to become a volunteer. Her natural ability to connect with street animals, combined with her first-hand experience of their struggles, made her an invaluable addition to the team. The shelter had even arranged temporary housing for her through a partner organization. "It's funny how things work out," Helen mused one afternoon, watching Max Benedict comfort a newly arrived rescue dog. "Sometimes you think you're helping an animal, but really they're the ones helping you find your way." Sarah and Ethan had extended their stay in Chicago yet again, unable to tear themselves away from the unfolding story. Their small hotel room had become a temporary home, and their jobs in Milwaukee were being managed remotely. But a decision loomed on the horizon, one that would affect not just them, but the remarkable cat who had changed their lives. "We've received several adoption applications for Max," Maya informed them during one of their daily visits to the shelter. "His story has touched so many people." But she hesitated, glancing at the cat who was currently performing his prayer gesture for a group of visiting children. "Dr. Chen thinks he's already chosen his family." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She and Ethan had discussed adoption extensively over the past few days, weighing their apartment's pet policies, their work schedules, and the responsibilities of cat ownership. But there was something else, something deeper that kept drawing them back to the shelter day after day. "It's not just about giving him a home," Ethan said thoughtfully. Watching Max Benedict move gracefully between visitors, offering his special brand of comfort to each one. "It's about continuing his mission." Sister Margaret, who had been helping socialize some of the newly rescued animals, overheard his comment. "That's exactly right," she smiled. Benedict's gift was never meant to be confined to one place or purpose. His journey from the mission, through hardship, and back to helping others is proof of that. As if understanding he was the topic of conversation, Max or Benedict approached their small group, performing his prayer gesture with a deliberate grace. But this time, he added something new to his routine. After completing his usual movement, he pressed his head against Sarah's hand, then Ethan's, purring loudly. "Well," Dr. Chen said, appearing with a folder in her hands, "it seems the decision has been made. That is, if you're ready to make it official." Sarah and Ethan shared a look, years of understanding passing between them in a single glance. Their weekend getaway to Chicago, meant to be an escape from their troubles, had transformed into something far more meaningful. In trying to save a cat, they had found themselves part of a larger story of healing and connection. "There's just one thing," Sarah said, kneeling beside their potential new family member. "What should we call you, Max or Benedict?" The cat responded by performing his prayer gesture, then playfully batting at the name tag on his new collar, a beautiful blend of his past and present identities, Max Benedict. "Perfect," Ethan grinned. "A name that honors all parts of his journey." As they began filling out the adoption paperwork, Helen approached with tears in her eyes. "You know," she said, watching Max Benedict settle contentedly between his new family, "in all my years on the streets, I've seen how hard times can change people and animals. Usually, it makes them harder, more closed off. But him," she gestured to the cat who had touched so many lives, "he took everything that happened to him and turned it into a gift for others." Sister Margaret nodded in agreement. "That's the real miracle here. Not just the prayer gesture, but what it represents. The capacity to transform pain into healing, fear into connection." The shelter's atmosphere was charged with emotion as staff and volunteers gathered to witness the official adoption. Tom, who had been making good on his promise to help locate other displaced animals, stood quietly in the background, his expression a mixture of regret and relief. Max Benedict, seemingly aware of the significance of the moment, moved to the center of the room and performed his signature gesture one final time as a shelter resident. The simple movement, once born of anxiety and uncertainty, had evolved into something profound, a symbol of resilience, hope, and the extraordinary power of compassion. As Sarah and Ethan prepared to take their new family member home, they realized that this wasn't just a happy ending to a mysterious story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would continue to touch lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The transition from shelter resident to family member proved smoother than anyone might have expected. Max Benedict settled into Sarah and Ethan's Milwaukee apartment as if he had lived there all his life, quickly establishing his favorite spots: a sunny windowsill in the living room, a cozy corner of their home office, and most importantly, the meditation cushion Sarah used for her morning yoga practice. It was during one of these morning sessions that Sarah noticed something remarkable. As she moved through her poses, Max Benedict would sit beside her, performing his prayer gesture in perfect synchronization with her movements. The harmony of their shared ritual soon became a cherished part of their daily routine. "I think he's teaching me more than I'm teaching him," Sarah mused to Ethan one morning, watching as Max Benedict performed his gesture for a neighbor's crying child in the hallway. The child's tears had immediately turned to wonder, then to giggles, as the cat continued his gentle performance. Word of Max Benedict's special ability spread quickly through their apartment building. Neighbors who had never spoken to each other before found themselves sharing stories in the hallway, drawn together by the remarkable cat who seemed to know exactly when someone needed comfort. The video from the Hope Shelter had gained even more traction online, inspiring a movement of sorts. People began sharing their own stories of animal-assisted healing, and shelters across the country reported increased interest in adoption, particularly of older cats and those with special needs. Helen, now fully settled into her role at the Hope Shelter, had become something of a local celebrity herself. Her insight into street animal behavior, combined with her natural storytelling ability, made her a valuable asset in the shelter's community outreach programs. She often shared Max Benedict's story during educational sessions, using it to illustrate the transformative power of compassion. "It's not just about the animals," she would tell her audiences. "It's about recognizing the capacity for healing in every living being, no matter what they've been through." Sister Margaret, inspired by the renewed interest in animal therapy, had begun consulting with several shelters to develop programs similar to the one she had run at St. Francis Mission. She kept in regular contact with Sarah and Ethan, delighting in updates about Max Benedict's new life. "He's doing exactly what he was meant to do," she wrote in one email, "just on a larger scale than we ever imagined." Even Tom had found a path to redemption. His information had led to the recovery of several more animals from his former pet shop, and he had thrown himself into supporting their rehabilitation. Working under Dr. Chen's guidance, he was learning to appreciate animals for their inherent worth rather than their potential for profit. But perhaps the most profound change had occurred in Sarah and Ethan themselves. The challenges that had driven them to seek escape in Chicago seemed less overwhelming now, viewed through the lens of their experience with Max Benedict. "Remember how lost we felt that weekend?" Ethan asked one evening, as they watched their extraordinary cat perform his prayer gesture for the sunset. "And now look at us." Sarah nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Their apartment had become a kind of unofficial healing space, with friends and neighbors often dropping by when they needed a moment of peace. Max Benedict welcomed each visitor with his characteristic grace, offering his special brand of comfort to anyone in need. They had started documenting these moments, creating a blog called Prayers and Purrs that shared stories of hope and healing. The blog had quickly gained a following, with readers from around the world finding inspiration in Max Benedict's journey from scared shelter cat to spiritual companion. One particularly touching entry came from a former resident of St. Francis Mission, who recognized Max Benedict from his time there. "Seeing him still bringing comfort to others," the person wrote, "reminds me that our past hardships don't have to define our future. Sometimes they prepare us to help others in ways we never expected." The shelter community had evolved as well. Dr. Chen reported a significant increase in volunteer applications, many citing Max Benedict's story as their inspiration. The shelter had even designated a special meditation corner, where newly arrived animals could find peace and quiet, inspired by their most famous former resident. Maya, the young volunteer who had first recognized Max Benedict from social media, had started a program matching elderly shelter cats with senior citizens living alone. "Every animal has the potential to change someone's life," she would say. "We just have to give them the chance." As autumn approached, bringing crisp winds and falling leaves to Milwaukee, Sarah and Ethan realized that their impulsive decision to help a strange cat in Millennium Park had set in motion a chain of events that continued to create ripples of positive change in the world. Max Benedict, curled contentedly on his meditation cushion, continued his daily rituals of prayer and comfort, transforming lives one gesture at a time. His journey from abandoned pet to beloved spiritual companion had become more than just a heartwarming story. It had become a testament to the extraordinary power of resilience, compassion, and the unexpected ways that healing could manifest in the world. Winter returned to Chicago, bringing with it memories of that fateful day in Millennium Park. 1 year had passed since Sarah and Ethan had first encountered the praying cat, and now they found themselves back in the city for a very special occasion, the grand opening of Hope Shelter's new Healing Hearts Wing, a dedicated space for animal-assisted therapy, inspired by Max Benedict's story. The new wing, funded by donations that had poured in from around the world, featured calm, meditation-friendly spaces where animals and humans could connect in peaceful surroundings. Photos of Max Benedict performing his signature prayer gesture adorned the walls, alongside stories of other animals who had overcome adversity to become sources of comfort and healing. "It's amazing how one small gesture can create such big changes," Helen remarked, now barely recognizable from the street-worn woman they'd met a year ago. As the shelter's lead community outreach coordinator, she carried herself with newfound confidence, her weathered face glowing with purpose. Max Benedict, who had made the journey back to Chicago with Sarah and Ethan for the occasion, moved through the new wing with diplomatic grace. He performed his prayer gesture for each new arrival, paying special attention to the nervous animals still adjusting to shelter life. "He remembers," Sister Margaret observed, watching him comfort a trembling young cat. "He knows exactly what they're feeling." The success of the Healing Hearts Wing had led to similar programs being implemented in shelters across the country, with Sister Margaret traveling frequently to provide guidance and training. The opening ceremony brought together all the people whose lives had been touched by Max Benedict's journey. Dr. Chen gave a moving speech about the transformative power of compassion, while Maya presented a video montage of successful adoptions inspired by the praying cat's story. Tom, who had found his calling as an advocate for ethical animal care, spoke candidly about his past mistakes and the lessons he'd learned. "Sometimes our greatest teachers come into our lives in unexpected ways," he said, watching Max Benedict perform his gesture for a group of shelter volunteers. "They show us that it's never too late to change, to make things right." The Prayers and Purrs blog had evolved into a full-fledged non-profit organization, connecting animal therapy programs with communities in need. Sarah and Ethan found themselves traveling occasionally to share their story, always with Max Benedict by their side, his peaceful presence touching hearts wherever they went. But perhaps the most powerful moment of the day came when a surprise visitor arrived at the ceremony. The young girl who had been present in Millennium Park the day Max Benedict was rescued. Now a regular shelter volunteer, she brought with her a drawing she'd made that day, showing the praying kitty and his angels. "I knew you were special," she told Max Benedict, who responded with his signature gesture, drawing tears from many of the onlookers. "You helped me believe in miracles." The shelter's new meditation garden, a peaceful space where visitors could sit and reflect, had become a symbol of the transformation that had taken place over the past year. The plaque at its entrance bore a simple message: "Every act of kindness creates ripples that reach far beyond our understanding." As evening approached, Sarah and Ethan found themselves standing in the exact spot where they'd first discovered Max Benedict. The park looked different in the golden light of sunset, but the memory of that cold winter morning remained vivid in their minds. "We came here looking for an escape," Sarah reflected, watching Max Benedict perform his prayer gesture for a passing couple. "Instead, we found a purpose." The impact of their chance encounter continued to grow. The Hope Shelter had become a model for innovative animal care, combining traditional shelter services with holistic healing approaches. Helen's street animal outreach program had been replicated in cities across the country, while Sister Margaret's animal therapy guidelines were being incorporated into social work programs nationwide. Max Benedict, the catalyst for all these changes, remained as serene as ever, continuing his daily practice of bringing comfort to others. His story had evolved from a viral video sensation into something far more meaningful, a living testament to the power of resilience and the endless possibilities for healing. As darkness fell over Chicago, the lights of the new Healing Hearts Wing illuminated the shelter's facade, creating a warm and welcoming beacon in the night. Inside, animals and humans alike found solace in the peaceful spaces, each connection forging another link in the chain of compassion that had begun with a simple prayer-like gesture in the snow. The year had come full circle, but the ripples of change continued to spread, touching lives in ways that no one could have predicted that cold winter morning in Millennium Park. For Sarah, Ethan, and their remarkable companion, it was clear that their journey was far from over. It was, in many ways, just beginning. The sun rose over Milwaukee one spring morning, its warm rays filtering through the curtains of Sarah and Ethan's apartment. Max Benedict sat in his usual spot on the meditation cushion, performing his morning prayers alongside Sarah's yoga routine, just as he had done countless times before. But today felt different, special somehow. It was the second anniversary of their fateful encounter in Millennium Park, and the living room walls now told the story of their journey together. Photos captured moments of joy and healing, Max Benedict comforting patients at children's hospitals, sitting serenely at wellness retreats, and bringing peace to elderly care homes. Each image reflected the extraordinary impact one small act of kindness could have on the world. The Prayers and Purrs organization had blossomed beyond anything they could have imagined. What started as a simple blog had grown into a movement, inspiring people worldwide to open their hearts to animals in need. Shelters across the globe had adopted the Healing Hearts program, creating spaces where animals and humans could heal together. Helen had become a sought-after speaker at animal welfare conferences, sharing her experiences from both sides of the shelter system. Her program for helping people transition from street life while keeping their animal companions had been particularly successful, breaking down barriers that had previously seemed insurmountable. "It's like Max Benedict showed us all how to pray," she often said in her presentations. "Not with words, but with actions, with presence, with unconditional love." Sister Margaret's animal therapy curriculum had been integrated into numerous social work programs, while Dr. Chen's research on the Max Benedict effect, the measurable impact of animal-assisted healing, had been published in several prestigious journals. Even Tom had found his calling, working with corporate entities to establish ethical guidelines for pet-related businesses. But perhaps the most profound change had occurred in the quiet, everyday moments. The apartment building where Sarah and Ethan lived had transformed into a close-knit community, with neighbors regularly gathering for what they playfully called meditation with Max. Children who once feared animals now sat quietly beside him, learning patience and empathy through his example. That morning, as Sarah finished her yoga practice, she noticed Max Benedict doing something new. After his usual prayer gesture, he walked to the window and sat watching the sunrise, his paws pressed together longer than usual. Ethan joined them, camera in hand to document the moment for their blog's anniversary post. "You know," Sarah said softly, "I used to think we rescued him that day, but really, he rescued all of us." Max Benedict turned to them, performing his gesture with a grace that seemed to encompass all the joy, pain, healing, and hope of their shared journey. In that moment, they understood that his story would continue to touch lives long after that first snowy encounter in Millennium Park. The morning light caught his fur, creating a gentle halo effect that reminded them of that young girl's drawing, the praying kitty and his angels. But they knew now that the real angels were the countless individuals who had opened their hearts to the possibility of healing, who had allowed themselves to be transformed by a simple gesture of grace. As they prepared for another day of sharing their message of hope and healing, Sarah and Ethan watched Max Benedict settle into his favorite sunbeam. His prayer gesture, once born of fear and uncertainty, had become a universal symbol of resilience and transformation. Through him, they had learned that every ending could be a new beginning, every hardship an opportunity for growth, and every small act of kindness a seed that could grow into something extraordinary. The story of the praying cat of Chicago had evolved into something far greater than a viral sensation or a heartwarming tale. It had become a reminder that in a world often divided by differences, the language of compassion was universal. Max Benedict's journey from abandoned pet to spiritual companion had shown that the capacity for healing existed in every heart, waiting only for the right moment to flourish. As the morning sun filled their home with golden light, Max Benedict continued his peaceful vigil, his presence a living testament to the enduring power of love, resilience, and the extraordinary ability of one small creature to change the world, one prayer at a time. Dear listeners, we hope Max Benedict's extraordinary journey has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched the lives of countless others. His story reminds us that sometimes the most profound healing comes in unexpected forms, and that every act of kindness has the power to create lasting change. If you've been moved by this tale of transformation, we invite you to join our community of compassionate souls. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of hope and healing. Like this video to help others find this message of love, and share your own stories of animal-inspired transformation in the comments below. Together, we can continue to spread Max Benedict's legacy of peace, one prayer at a time. Remember, just as he showed us, sometimes the smallest gestures can create the biggest changes in our world.